Welcome back to another edition of Global Book Network, the show where we sit with authors all across the world to ask them about their craft and their work. My name is Global Boys, and I, for one, am excited to have this special guest with me today because, as we were discussing before you went live, I just came back from Germany and I learned a lot about this particular subject matter. The book is called Letters from World War II, about a romance despite the world literally falling apart. Please welcome Barbara Jane Hannon to the show. How's it going?
It's going great. I love an opportunity to talk about this book.
Absolutely, and talk about it we shall. Before we hit the record button, the first thing you said to me that really piqued my interest is that you were an accidental author.
Absolutely.
Talk to me about that. How did that come about?
I never, ever. I'm a nurse, okay? I'm an ER nurse, retired. A writer? No, I never set out to write a book, ever. What I thought I'd be doing in my retirement, writing a book, I don't think so. That was not on the bucket list. But I think I am a pretty good example of someone who, if you believe passionately enough in a story and you want that story told, you can write. You can write because there is a reason you're writing. And that was what happened to me. I did not know this story. And when I figured it out, it grabbed me so hard. I had to share it. So
yeah, we'll get into subject matter in a minute, but that just begs the question, or raises the question. If you weren't planning on writing the book, what was a moment in time that made you go, oh no, I have to dive in feet first to make sure this happens?
Well, one of the issues for me, the reason I started this whole project was my parents left me with these surprise, unbelievable documents from World War II. Telegrams, medical records, flight records, you name it. They're now over 80 years old. The telegrams alone from the War Department that told my mother my dad was missing, those are 82 years old now. And they're very precious and they're very historic. So what I decided to do was scan all of these documents to preserve them. That's what I did. I bought a scanner and started scanning them. And then my interest got piqued. Now, when did this telegram come and why and what was going on and that sort of thing? Then I realized whoever got this massive digital file, which would be one of my dad's granddaughters, I'm sure eventually, would not have any idea what this document was until I wrote about it. What is this letter? What is this document? So I started writing about each document I scanned, and the story got bigger and bigger and bigger with what I was writing. Then I realized the story of what my dad went through just got me. Yeah. And I felt a need, now that I was this far, to just tell my dad's story, because unfortunately, I didn't know it when I was growing up. I could never tell him how I felt about what he did. My dad was an unbelievable hero here in World War II. I never got a chance to tell him because I didn't know the story. Yeah. And my parents during the war wrote each other 84 letters during the war. And when my mother died, we had to clean the house out. My dad died first. Then, of course, my mom died and my sisters and I had to go clean this house out. We found this box of letters, 84 letters, stunning, unbelievable letters they wrote each other. And then all these incredible historic documents, everything from prisoner of war records in German to flight records, French francs, German Reichsmarks, all of this. And I thought, what? So I have to tell you, growing up, my sisters and I knew our dad was in World War II.
Okay.
The picture of my parents, which is on the cover of the book back here, is their wedding picture. Clearly, he's in a uniform. We knew he was in World War II. In fact, growing up, we used to celebrate Jump Day every January 11th. Every January 11th, my dad would come down from upstairs and look at us and go, "It's Jump Day. Let's have pancakes." But what we knew as young kids only was that our dad jumped out of an airplane with a parachute. How cool is that
Yeah.
your dad did that? But we, of course, didn't know why he was on the plane or why did he have to jump out of the plane? We didn't know until we were older. And when we were older, then we finally got the story. And we didn't know the story. And when we finally learned a few things, just a few things, like he jumped out of this airplane in the middle of a snowstorm and he was captured by the Germans and taken to a German prison camp. And then when the war was over, he got on a boat and came back. That's really what we knew. Never once did I think this was horrific or horrible, because he never said it was. He would tell us a few funny stories about being in this prison camp. They had, for instance, an imaginary dog named Rover, and they'd throw the sticks, and the Germans would look for this dog. They told us about the food. They told us about digging tunnels. He told us just funny things, nothing horrific. So growing up, I just knew he was in this German prison camp. And then, of course, I got on with my life. I didn't ever really ask him. Yeah. When I, however, started looking at all these documents, we found this entire box of documents. There were a couple of things that just absolutely stunned me. One was that he had all these French francs. I Googled them, and they were wartime issue French francs to German or to American soldiers physically in France. So my dad had all these issued French francs. The U.S. Army paid these guys post-war in French francs if they were in France, because if they paid them in U.S. dollars, they would ruin the French economy, sink the franc. So my dad had to be in France. So I call my sisters, hey, do you ever remember Dad saying he was in France after the war? No, he wasn't in France. Remember, he was in a prison camp somewhere in Germany, got on a boat, and he was in France. Now, why was he in France? How did he get there? What was he doing there? How did he get from the prison camp? Stuff like that began to just drive me nuts. Yeah. And then I looked at a medical record before the war, and my dad weighed 165 pounds. After the war, June 7th, 1945, the war had been over for a month. Wherever he was at, they weighed him. He weighed 124 pounds. So I'm like, how did my dad lose 45 pounds? Well, what, did they not feed him in this prison camp? My dad always referred to this prison camp as a prison camp, not a prison. Mm-hmm. And when we asked him about it, he said, well, we slept in bunk beds and cabins, and we cooked our own food outside. You know, to somebody like me, it sounded a bit like summer camp, doesn't it? You sleep in cabins. Is this bad? I had no idea. So I had to put this story together. And the first thing I did was go to England, to his air base in England, and met the curator. And I know exactly what happened to my dad's plane, why it was shot down, where it was shot down, what was happening, how many missions. They had a whole thing on my dad in this thing, that he was the lead navigator of the 533rd Squadron. And I started putting pieces together. Then I went to the prison camp in Germany. Mm-hmm. There is a memorial there. The place that it was in Bart, Germany is still standing. Nothing has been built. I met the curator of the camp, who is German. He's a German apologist who feels very bad, you know, mm-hmm. like a lot of Germans do. You were just in Germany. There is a feeling, especially in this little town, that there was this horrific prison camp there, and the people did nothing. They knew stuff was going on there. I met him. I got to be good friends with him, and I learned exactly what happened to my dad in this prison camp and how he got out. It is an unbelievable story how my dad and these other 9,000 prisoners got out of this prison camp, because at the end of the war, they were in East Germany, which became well, it became part of East Germany, the Russians were up there. The Russians were in control. The Russians may have been our allies, but they certainly were not our friends and had no interest in letting these POWs leave. And so the story of how they got out of there and were sneaked pretty much into France is very interesting. It's a great story.
Okay, so what about the part when you decided to go and see the places for yourself in the United Kingdom and Germany? Was that something that you said, look, to fill some holes in the gaps, or was kind of like a hey, look, something I want to make sure it was validated? Like, what was that part of you?
I think it was a little of both. When I started reading the letters, especially the letters my dad wrote my mother from England, when you read them, you get a sense that my dad was very frightened. He was very frightened. His letters, he flew 16 missions up to 1944, January, which was a pretty big accomplishment, because I think people don't realize that more airmen from the 8th Air Force were killed in World War II than the entire Marine Corps. It was a slaughterhouse in the skies. I knew nothing of that. I knew nothing of what it was like for my dad in England, except for these letters that were hinting at things, statements to my mother like, it gets hard to get up in the plane in the mornings because you don't know what's going to happen. You know, you get this sense from his letters. And so I had to see it. I had to know how long he was there, what he was doing there. I had to know why his plane, I just had to know. The overriding issue for me always with telling this story was, you know what? All I would have had to do was ask my dad. He would have told me everything. I never asked because I didn't know. And yet my dad, I see him so differently. I will tell you, one of the things that he wrote to my mother was in a letter 3 days before his plane was shot down. And he wrote to my mother, it gets hard to get in the plane sometimes because you don't know what's going to happen. And your life hangs in the balance until you see the coast of England again and you can relax. But I signed up for this job and I will do it to the best of my ability for my crew, my squadron, and my country, no matter what happens. My dad wrote that. When I read that letter, I mean, I cried for hours. How brave was my dad? How committed was my dad to say that, you know? And I just see him differently. And I could have asked him, and I never got the chance to tell him how brave he was, what a good job he did, what a great patriot. I never got the chance. Because I didn't know. My dad never talked about it. And that was true. I've met a lot of children of World War II vets. I met them in the celebration. I went over to the prison camp in May because they had the 80th celebration of the liberation of the prison camp. And I met all these children and grandchildren of other prisoners. They all said the same thing, that their dad never talked about it. And they liked my book because it gave them a sense of maybe what their dad went through. Because these guys, once they got home, I mean, my parents, all totaled, my dad flew off to England. My parents were married. They had like a one week honeymoon. My dad got on a plane, flew to England, and my mom didn't see him for 2 years. They did not see each other for 2 years. And yet, my parents wrote these unbelievable, stunning letters. People don't write letters like that anymore. Just to read these letters, the way people communicated is stunning. The kinds of things they wrote each other. And, you know, it's kind of funny. When I first read the letters, they're love letters. You don't sort of see your parents writing these unbelievable, passionate letters, you know. My mom was on a train going somewhere, and she's writing my dad a letter in prison camp, remembering their honeymoon and how much I'm reading this going, These are my parents, right?
Yeah.
So I am very proud of them. I am very proud of the way they treated this whole situation. In 84 letters, there's not one angry word. There's not one statement of this terrible war. Why did this happen to us? Nothing. There are just these letters where they're so positive they will see each other again. But of course, they didn't know if they would,
Yeah.
because it was the war. And my mother knew, especially because she got all the press in her scrapbook. She kept this scrapbook. There's morbid articles in this scrapbook about the Great Escape. Remember Stalag 3? I don't know if you know that story. These guys escaped. The Germans captured them and then put them up in front of a firing squad. Every single one of these American soldiers. There's scary stuff that went on in the war. So I think my parents didn't know if they'd ever see each other again, but they never breathed a word of that. It was always, when we see each other again, this will be our last Christmas. I know in my heart it'll be soon. All of this positive stuff. I'm very proud of them.
Yeah. Well, just for my own reference, how quickly were letters turned around? Did they write as soon as they got it? It was every day, every week?
So these letters, it took 4 months for one of my mom's letters to get to my dad, and 4 months back. My dad, every time he got a package or a letter from my mother, put the date received and the date. So I can see how long it took every letter. And it was, when you have that turnaround time, it's very difficult to keep a conversation, right? Like my dad was a chess player, and he wrote my mother that he had made it to the finals of the all-camp chess tournament. And he wrote that to her. He wrote, "One more game to go and I could be the champion." But it took 4 months for that letter to get to my mother. My mother immediately wrote back, "Did you win?" And it took 4 months for that letter to get back to him. And by that time, that was 8 months ago. So they had, they couldn't keep up a conversation. My mother did a great job of just writing to him about everyday stuff. She was teaching high school at the time. She wrote about her students, and she wrote about, her garden and her victory garden. She just wrote everyday stuff, which I think made my dad's life feel more normal, when he could read. He could not write very much because the Germans heavily censored these letters. You pick up one of these letters and it says, "Dear Dorothy," and then it's all black, and then it says a few more things, and it's blacked out because the Germans read every letter and censored them. So he had to be very careful and not say anything about that he was starving, I suppose, had what life was like, because the Germans censored it. They censored her letters too, to him. Wow. In one letter, she was telling him where her brother was stationed. It says, Norman's going to be sent to, and it's all black because, of course, the Germans didn't want any of that. So anyway.
Fascinating stories. And I think it's interesting because we all have, I guess, people from our generation have an idea what the war could have been like or what it is like from movies and TV. But this is a very real, visceral thing that you lived to and you put together, which is pretty amazing. Well, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show here on Global Book Network. But now if people want to get a copy of the book for themselves, how do they go about doing that?
So the book is on Amazon. It's called Letters from World War II. And, I self-published it. I just wanted somewhere, someplace for my dad's story to be somewhere. I just wanted it out there to tell his story. So it's available on Amazon under Letters from World War II.
Wow. And thanks so much for sharing your story. And I do hope people pick up a copy of the book because I do think that World War II seems to get almost forgotten through generations, but we shouldn't forget of how that impacted the world even to this day. So
I thank you for saying that, because, my parents were just two ordinary people. They weren't anything. They were just two ordinary kids when they met. Teenagers. My dad commits to the war. My mother, is home here. And my gosh, they were no different than a lot of kids their age in that generation who had never been out of their hometown, right? People didn't travel in the 40s like we do today. And all of a sudden they're in Germany, France, fighting for this country. These young kids. What great kids. I mean, they were great. We shouldn't forget them.
Absolutely.